Have you ever gone camping deep in the woods, far away from cities, lights, and other people? Most people go camping to relax, to listen to the wind in the trees, and the quiet sounds of nature. But sometimes, people hear something else in the forest. Tonight, you'll hear 5 terrifying camping stories that happened to real people. And after hearing them, you might think twice before camping in the woods again. One summer, a college student decided to go camping alone in a remote forest in Oregon. He found a small clearing, set up his tent, and started a campfire. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Around midnight he turned off his flashlight and tried to fall asleep. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps moving through the leaves. At first he thought it was an animal. But the footsteps didn't move away. They started circling his tent. Once, twice, 3 times. He held his breath and listened. The footsteps stopped right beside the tent. Then something pressed against the fabric. A hand. A human hand. He froze. The hand stayed there for a few seconds, then slowly slid away. Moments later the footsteps began running into the darkness of the forest. He grabbed his flashlight and rushed outside. No one was there, but on the ground beside his tent, there were bare human footprints leading into the woods. He packed his things at sunrise and left immediately. He never went camping alone again. 2 friends went camping in a national park in Colorado. They hiked several miles into the forest and set up their camp near a small lake. That evening they sat by their fire watching the water. As it got darker, one of them noticed a light between the trees. At first they assumed it was another campsite. But the light looked strange. It was a campfire, but no one was around it. Curious, they decided to walk closer. When they got within about 20 meters they noticed something strange. Around the fire were stones arranged in a perfect circle. And in the center of that circle, there was an old backpack. One of them picked it up and opened it. Inside were a flashlight, a map, and a passport. The passport belonged to a man who had been missing for 3 years. Right then the fire suddenly went out, as if a strong wind had blown it out. But there was no wind. They immediately returned to their campsite and reported it to the park rangers the next morning. The man from the passport was never found. One hiker went on a solo trip in the mountains of Montana. That night he sat beside his fire listening to the crackling wood. The forest around him was completely dark. Around 1 in the morning he heard a voice. Someone quietly said, "Hey." He thought he imagined it. But a few seconds later the voice came again. "Hey, are you there?" He quickly grabbed his flashlight and shined it into the trees. No one. He assumed it must be another camper. So he called out, "Who's there?" The response came almost immediately. But the voice sounded right behind him. "I'm here." He turned around instantly. No one was there. The forest was completely empty. He didn't hear the voice again. But the rest of the night he had the feeling that something was watching him from the darkness. The next morning he left the forest. And he never went on another solo camping trip again. A family went camping in a forest in Washington state. They hiked for several hours before deciding to stop for the night. While collecting firewood, their son noticed something strange. High between the trees hung an old tent. It was tied to branches about 15 feet above the ground. At first they thought someone had simply left it there. But when they walked closer they noticed the tent was slowly moving, swinging back and forth, even though there was almost no wind. The father pointed his flashlight inside. For a split second he thought he saw something move inside the tent. They immediately decided to leave the area. Later they reported it to the park rangers. But when the rangers visited the spot the next day, the tent was gone. A group of hikers set up camp deep in the forests of California. Late at night they sat around their fire telling stories. Around 2 in the morning they began hearing footsteps moving around their campsite. At first they assumed it was a deer. But the footsteps were too heavy. And too slow. Something was walking around their camp for nearly 20 minutes. They shined their flashlights into the trees but couldn't see anything. Eventually the footsteps stopped. One of the hikers pointed his flashlight deeper into the woods. For a brief moment he saw a tall human-like figure standing between the trees. But the shape looked wrong. Too tall. And the way it moved didn't look natural. Then it disappeared into the darkness. They never heard the footsteps again. But none of them slept for the rest of the night. Forests can be beautiful and peaceful. But sometimes, they hide things we don't understand. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe for more terrifying mysteries. And remember, sometimes the scariest thing in the woods is not an animal.